So that was Hughes's first two famous flights with the H-1 Silver Bullet and the Lockheed Model 14 twin engine in 1938. This was 35 and 38. His next great archetypal flight was really his most dramatic. It was his sort of Icarus flight, as Scorsese calls it in one of his interviews when he's talking about the background material to his film The Aviator, which took place in 1946. He built a forerunner of the U-2 spy plane for the military. It was the XF-11. And it was a revolutionary plane, and he was working out the design for it, and he decided to take it for a test flight. This was in 1946. And he took it for a test flight over Beverly Hills. And he was warned by the military, it's an Icarus flight because he was warned by the military not to retract his landing gear, not to carry more than, I think, 600 gallons of fuel, and not to fly for more than 45 minutes. He ignored all those warnings. And so after about 75 minutes into the flight, the right rear propeller went into an opposite spin, creating a drag that sucked the plane down, and he crashed right into Beverly Hills, into a suburban neighborhood in Beverly Hills. This is wonderfully realized and dramatized in Scorsese's film The Aviator. No one was killed in that accident, but it was a terrible accident for Hughes. It cost him a lot of damage. This was actually his fifth and most dramatic plane crash. He had been in a number of plane crashes before this and been seriously injured in a couple of them. But in this case, his heart was actually moved over to the other side of his body. He had third-degree burns. He was really a mess. And so this was truly an Icarus flight. And as a result of this crash, though, it created a kind of sucking vortex in his life that gradually pulled him back down to the earth. Because he became addicted first to morphine as a result because of the pain from the accident, and also then to codeine, which he basically was addicted to for the rest of his life. And this ruined his career, his flying career, his aviation career, the drug addiction. And so there's one last great flight, and this is also in Scorsese's movie, the flight in the following year, 1947, of the Hercules, the so-called Spruce Goose, which was the world's largest airplane and still remains to this day the world's largest airplane. I think it was something like 5 stories tall and his wingspan as wide as a football field. And he was brought in for a Senate investigation and being accused of wasting taxpayers' money during the war, because he didn't finish the plane until after World War II was over and had been contracted by the military to do this. And he didn't finish the plane, and he was supposed to mass produce it, and he only ended up producing one of them. And as a result of that, it was thought that he was wasting taxpayers' money. But he silenced everyone by getting this behemoth off the ground, off the coast of Long Beach, over the sea. He got it up into the air for just almost a minute, just under a minute. And this astonished everyone, and it terminated, as Scorsese shows in his film, it terminated the Senate's investigation into him. And that ended it. And it was also his last great flight. And it was archetypal. So Hughes was a womanizer. There's another dimension to Hughes here that I saw in the biographies, was that he was a womanizer, and he collected women just like a lepidopterist collecting butterflies. He dated all these famous Hollywood starlets. And he had a very suffocating mother as a young child who died when he was 14. He was her only child. And his mother was very suffocating, and he may have inherited from her his lifelong bacteriophobia. But I see in him growing these mechanized wings and trying to escape from the earth, a kind of attempt to escape from his mother, and the archetypal myth of the Great Mother, and him playing the role of the Tammuz, Osiris, Dionysus phallic male, the vanishing male, whose rise and disintegration, as William Monroe Thompson has elsewhere pointed out, is the phallic rhythm of civilization, which is based on rise and fall. That every civilization comes into being and collapses inevitably, as ours will too one day. And I think Howard Hughes's life, it's a parable of Western man's descent into the machine, because it parables his fall, sinking, and capture by the machine, his conquest of the earth with the machine. He circumnavigates it, basically miniaturizes it to the level of a toy, a plaything, just the way women for him were like little dolls. And he captures the earth the same way he captured women, and conquered it and overmastered it, and then eventually ended up with madness and utter stasis and immobility. And this may be a prophecy for the eventual history of Western civilization as well, who knows. But I do see his life as a parable for the descent of Western man into the machine, and the costs and consequences of the mechanical civilization on him. So we get to, that's the first half of his life. That's what you get in Scorsese's film. But then as we read the biographies and move into the second half of his life, things get a little more interesting, I think, because his flight career ended because of his drug addiction, but his mind was still very brilliant and very active for a long time, and he began to work and subcontract for the military now to design. He designed the first air-to-air missile called the Falcon, which the military was very happy to acquire from him. But then, right about in the early 60s, in 1961, 62, 63, he designed, his company, Hughes Air, designed and sent into orbit the world's first geosynchronous satellites. Now this is a threshold for humanity. This is a major crossing. Sputnik had been sent into orbit in 1958, I believe, by the Russians, and as Marshall McLuhan said, this surrounding the Earth by this tiny little gadget then was tantamount to, for the first time, encasing the Earth inside of a mechanical environment. The Earth was put into a mechanical environment by surrounding it for the first time. And then Howard Hughes then further laid this out by putting these geosynchronous satellites in orbit. The SYNCOM-2, I think it's called, was put into orbit in '63, and it made possible the first live telephone conversation between JFK and an African prime minister. I've forgotten his name. But it made the first live, real-time telephone conversation possible from these two different parts of the planet. And then SYNCOM-3 then the following year made possible the ability to watch in real time the Olympics, which were held in Japan at that time, and it made possible everyone to watch them live in real time. So Hughes was the inventor really of the real-time global ecumeny that we live in to this day, and the first to begin to create a new equivalent to the Roman limes, the wall that separated the realm of civilization from not civilization, with this new equivalent, this technosphere, that with these satellites put into orbit in the thermosphere surrounding the Earth, begins to create a modern limes that is equivalent to that ancient limes, and in which the world not only is inside a mechanical environment, but now has a new kind of dome or mechanized world ceiling surrounding it. And Hughes was really the creator of this kind of technology that made possible, for example, Elvis Presley's 1973 Live from Aloha, Live from Hawaii concert that he put on, which was the world's first planetary scale live rock concert. That was the first time that was done, and that was directly dependent upon these geosynchronous satellites that were put into orbit by Howard Hughes. So he is really the architect of this global technosphere that we are now surrounded and encompassed by. And as he's doing this, he's coming up with these machines, he's slowly becoming a very strange individual. He'd always been a little on the weird side, but now at this time, he moved to Las Vegas. He hired for his staff exclusively Mormons because they were the only people he trusted. And so he hires these Mormons to work out his account and run his empire for him, and he moves into Las Vegas. He has a Vegas period just like Elvis does, and he's there at about the same time as Elvis. And he moved into the top floors of this hotel, and he had his aides black out all the windows. He didn't want any daylight getting in, and he would set up his movie projector and he would watch movies. He would sleep all day, usually till 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, wake up and spend the entire night watching movies, eating Hershey bars, letting his fingernails and toenails grow to absurd lengths. Sometimes he would urinate in the corners. He took very poor care of himself here, and he didn't let anybody get near him. There were people who worked for him who never saw him, and he became very agoraphobic. But at the same time, he's evolving these gigantic schemes. It's got a wonderful, somebody should make a great Faustian drama out of this. It's marvelous. He decides to start buying all these hotels and casinos in Las Vegas, and he starts thinking of Las Vegas as basically an equivalent to Walt Disney thinking of Epcot City as his little utopian pet project. He's actually thinking that he might eventually buy and own all of Las Vegas. And he buys hotel after hotel. He absolutely despises organized crime and gangsters, and he wanted to get rid of them, the same way Walt Disney, with the building of Disneyland, wanted to get rid of the seediness of the Coney Island type amusement park to make the place family friendly. Hughes too wanted to get rid of the gangsters out of Las Vegas. And so he buys this, and he's becoming more and more a prisoner. So whereas in the 1930s he had become probably the one individual who had the most freedom on the planet to move about its surface of the globe anywhere he wanted to go. And in those days, every time he wanted to go somewhere, he flew. And he just flew everywhere. The same way we get in our automobiles today, and we drive. Anytime we want to go somewhere, we drive. Hughes was that way with his airplanes, and so he was paving the way for the global aeropolis in which we now live. And with his geosynchronous satellites, he starts paving the way for the space age. This is a man who's really opening up these amazing pathways, and most people don't even realize that we're living in the world that he invented. And so he began to, his codeine addiction began to get worse and worse, and he became a prisoner of his own environment. He couldn't go anywhere. And the parable, I think, of the Glomar explorer, which the CIA contacted his organization, it becomes a wonderful parable for what was happening that sort of declined his life during these years. The Glomar was a ship that the CIA wanted the Hughes organization to build to retrieve a sunken Russian submarine that had fallen to the bottom of the ocean floor. But they didn't want anybody to know about it, and Hughes himself didn't even know what the real purpose was to get the submarine. His aides told him that what they were doing was designing the world's largest ship to begin mining minerals for the first time ever off the bottom of the ocean floor. So Hughes thought he was moving into new technological territory, so he was becoming very removed from the reality of what was going on around him. And so the CIA built this thing, and they used it, and they recovered their submarine, or half of it anyway. The other half fell off while they were bringing it up. And that was it. The Glomar was a technological mule. It was basically a one-shot deal. And it perfectly illustrates, it's a parody of a Howard Hughes achievement. It perfectly illustrates his fall here because he was completely unaware of the reality of what was going on. I mean, this operation has the scale and the scope and the audacity and magnificence of a Hughes technological project, but the irony is that it was used for a purpose that he himself no longer even knew what the real purpose was. So these are the later years of Howard Hughes in the late 60s and moving into the 70s, where he's losing control of his own organization, and the Mormons that he had hired are slowly beginning to take it away from him, and he's losing control of the whole operation, and he's becoming a prisoner. Now, he flew again toward the end of his life. This may have been in 1973 or thereabouts. One of his old friends contacted him, a man named Jack Reel. Contacted him, and he went to England, and he had to sober up for a couple of weeks, get off the drugs, so that he could fly again. And I think he flew 4 more flights in 2 different airplanes, and re-experienced this sort of glory of flying. But then one night, the fates arranged it for him, basically that when he got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, he actually broke his hip. And the surgeons who operated on him were absolutely appalled at the condition that he was in, with the long toenails and fingernails, and his skin, they said, had this kind of parchment-like quality to it that was just very unpleasant. But they put a pin in his hip, they fixed it, but he never walked again. And then he went back on the drugs, and he basically crawled back into bed and continued with the process of overdosing himself with codeine and slowly dying. And in this sense, I see him as exemplifying the myth of Volund, the ancient Germanic myth of Volund, who is the Daedalus figure, the smith of Germanic culture, and he's held captive by a king who hamstrings him so that he won't escape, and puts him on an island where he designs these technological marvels for this king. And then one day the king's sons come to visit him, and he kills them while they're curious looking at his objects. He kills them, cuts off their heads, turns their skulls into bowls, and takes their eyes and turns them into beautiful jewels, gives them to the king as a present, and then builds a pair of wings for himself and flies off. And I see how at the end of Hughes's life here, very much exemplifying that myth. What happened was he died while on board an airplane in mid-flight from Mexico to the USA to get medical care, and apparently it is said that he died of an overdose of codeine. But there is some suspicion about this. There's a suspicion that it's possible his Mormon aides decided to get rid of him, that he'd become a burden, and that they really wanted to get him out of the way, and they may have poisoned him with an overdose of codeine, got rid of him. But he died in flight, which is probably the way he would have wanted to go. And so that becomes the poetry and the archetypology of Howard Hughes's life. He is the fashioner of the stage of the proscenium now that the phenomenon of the light speed celebrity, the mega star, the multimedia superstar, will now begin to play itself out. So that's the life of Howard Hughes as I discuss it in this chapter of my book.